Switching to noise mode now, it simply becomes a noise generator. And you'll hear at the moment it's only generating low frequency or bass frequencies of the noise. But if I rotate Control A, what happens is it changes this from a low pass filter to a high pass filter, so we only get the high frequency part of the noise. And if I rotate Control B now, you can see what's happening is we're increasing the resonance of this filter, which is boosting the frequencies around the cutoff. So it makes it more obvious and colourful sounding. So this can be useful for adding a little bit more character or dirt to your sounds, or also when creating percussive patches. Moving on to FM now. This is frequency modulation, which is a style of synthesizing, and you've got two options for this: normal FM and hard FM, which is a pretty cool one. But both produce really nice, very characteristic sounds. Starting with FM then, you can hear at the moment we've just got a sine wave, so nothing's actually going on. But if I rotate Control A, you'll be able to see and hear what's going on. So what this dial is doing is it's tuning in the amount of frequency modulation, which, as you can see, creates some really interesting harmonics on the waveform. So it adds a lot of high frequency to the sound. Now this can be boosted even further if I rotate Control B, which controls the frequency of the modulator. You can hear it gets very crazy very quickly as a lot of high frequencies are added, and very, very loud high frequencies set to this max intensity as well. So the sound becomes very full on. Now, although the modulator itself is a sine wave, so that is, we are modulating this sine wave with another sine wave, the thing that's actually being modulated in this mode is whatever we set down here. So if we want to modulate, for example, one of these bass options, we can just choose that. Or maybe let's go for something a bit brighter like violin. And now, if I increase the intensity, you can hear we can frequency modulate this waveform. But the only thing to bear in mind really with frequency modulation is that if you've already got quite a complex waveform and you frequency modulate it, then sometimes the sound becomes completely unusable, as in the pitch is way off and it's impossible to play any kind of melodies because it's so out of tune. So sometimes it is better to stick to the simpler waveforms, like, for example, sine. And then we've got hard FM, which is very similar to FM, but it's actually phase modulation. But the effect is quite similar. So one of the differences you can hear there is that this dial is actually stepped. So it's not smoothly increasing the frequency of the modulator, but it's jumping. In this mode though, this mix dial actually does something quite unique, as you can hear there. And what it does is it morphs in the next wave in the list an octave down. So it's a bit like mixing in a sub-oscillator. So it's pretty cool for creating bass sound, because you can create this nice top end using these controls to apply the frequency modulation, and then blend in some of this pitched down waveform on top underneath using the mix dial. regular FM mode, the mix dial also allows you to blend in a different waveform, but in this case it's just the same waveform as the waveform you're modulating, but repitched according to the modulator's frequency. So it gives you even more options there for waveform blending once again. But again, we'll look at some more specific examples of how to use this later on. And moving on to the last two modes then. Firstly, we have AM sync, which is a combination of amplitude modulation and oscillator syncing. This again creates lots of very cool high frequency harmonics and overtones onto the signal. And without going into too much detail with what happens, you'll see if I rotate this dial here that the frequency increases, which means we get more high frequencies introduced into the sound as this waveform is re-triggering in a more rapid way across the display here. Control A in this mode changes it from a sawtooth waveform to a square. So a very cool mode there. In this mode, the mix control down the bottom here blends it into the waveform, which is also getting modulated, as you can see. And finally, we've got saw pulse width modulation, which is similar to the classic mode modulation when it's set to a square wave. But in this instance, what happens is, if I set it, so we're just listening to this waveform up the top here. At the moment, you can see it's a regular sawtooth, but if I increase it, then what we can do is switch between 4 different types. If I increase the pulse width a little bit, what you can see is each one of these is a little dip happening throughout the sawtooth waveform. And what that does is it introduces a kind of slightly more tuned element, which rises in pitch as this type changes. And you can see now if I adjust Control B that each one of these pulses modulates as its width modulating, as you can see, and it creates a similar kind of result to when modulating the square wave from before. In this mode, you can see slightly differently on the waveform at the bottom here, where it's just literally changing the phase of that waveform rather than actually modulating it. So loads of different options there with the different modes, which we'll explore as we work through the course.